This is our next session on the book of Genesis, and this time we are starting with chapter 5. Chapter 5 begins with the statement, "This is the written account of Adam's line." Now, as you know, the book has this internal outline. This is the account. You will see this again and again, 10 times in the book of Genesis, and each time indicating a new section. Now, sometimes this outline doesn't go the way that we think it would, and that we think that what is taking place after that announcement doesn't really relate to that. But if we take it in stride and look at it, we can see that it does make sense. When God created man, he made him in the likeness of God. That, of course, is recalling Genesis chapter 1. And remember, the word here is God, so it's Elohim, which is, again, recalling chapter 1. He created them, male and female. So, although chapter 2 describes the creation as being Adam first and Eve second, that means dealing in greater detail with it. But chapter 1 says that male and female are both created in God's image, and he blessed them. And when they were created, he called them man. So this word man, in contrast to present political correctness, does refer to the human race, as in we now say mankind or humanity. When Adam had lived 130 years, he had a son in his own likeness, in his own image. Notice, in his own likeness, in those images, the same vocabulary that's used for God creating man in his likeness and image. Now, although God is invisible, and God is a spiritual being and not material, and consequently being made in God's image doesn't have to do with that. Doesn't have to do with physicality. But when Adam has his child in his own image and likeness, of course, since Adam is a material being, now we're talking about that as well, a physical being. And he named him Seth. So we've already talked about Cain and Abel and the death of Abel. And so this is Seth being born in Abel's place. After Seth was born, Adam lived 800 years and had other sons and daughters. Altogether, Adam lived 930 years, and then he died. Now, God had said to Adam, "On the day that you eat from this tree, you will die." So it said, he lived 930 more years, and then he died. When God says that on this day you will die, two things need to be remembered. Number one is God's measurement of time is a little different. God's eternal. So, for example, Peter on the day of Pentecost says we are living in the last days. And then he quotes from Joel, who had lived hundreds of years before, "In the last days I will pour out my spirit." And so from Peter's time till now, we're in the last days, and that's almost 2,000 years now. So we need to understand that a day is to the Lord as 1,000 years. 1,000 years is as a day, as Peter says in his letter. And so the consequence is that when God says, "The day that you live, you will die," well, actually, if you want to be technical about it, a day as the Lord is 1,000 years. Adam does live less than 1,000 years, so that would tie in with that. But that's just talking about God living in eternity and not in time, and therefore God has his own measurement of these things. The day that you live, you will die. The day that if you want to take the solar day, the day that they lived, they were doomed to die, and and God said, "Now that they have eaten from this tree, we must remove them from the garden so that they don't eat from the tree of life and live forever." This was an act of mercy, an act of compassion, so that they would not remain in a state of sin eternally. Adam lives 930 years, he dies. Now, he has many other sons and daughters. So your question, where did Cain get his wife? This is one of the possible solutions. Another one being that we do know that the Neanderthals had they were just as smart as modern men. They have this actually larger mental brain capacity than modern man does. However, we do not know, and we also do know about the Neanderthals that they were aware of life after death, and when they buried their dead, they put grave goods with the deceased person. So when people do that, they're thinking about the life of that person in their life after death, and the Neanderthals did that. So, made in God's likeness and in God's image. If God had a previous creation to Adam and Eve, and that was the Neanderthals, if that is the case, and then when Cain looked around saying, who's Cain's wife, and who will kill me, and where does he get his wife from? It's possible. We do know that all human beings except blacks have some Neanderthal blood. DNA testing has advanced to the state that DNA skeletons have been able to be tested for this, and so it's a very minuscule amount. Apparently, most of the Neanderthals died. How did they die? Was it warfare with the Cro-Magnon, with the Homo sapiens sapiens? Or was it epidemics that killed them off, like many of the Native Americans did when the Europeans came there? We don't know what caused the Neanderthals to die off in large numbers, but we do know that some of them mated with Homo sapiens sapiens, and there were children from that, and because all people on Earth except the Negro race have some of this in their blood. So there are plenty of solutions to the question, where did he get his wife from? You may say, well, if he married his sister, that would be terrible. Oh yes, you know what? That's when Moses gives the list of prohibited sexual unions, and don't marry your sister is one of them. But remember that Moses' own parents were half-brother, half-sister, and Abraham long before that, and Sarah were half-brother, half-sister. So people have been doing this, and to anachronistically take a rule that was later, don't marry your brother and sister, Mosaic law, and then apply it to centuries previous, that would be ridiculous. Something is not illegal until the law says that you cannot do it. Then it becomes illegal. Was it a bad idea? Yes, it's a bad idea. Abraham and Sarah, look how much trouble they had having children. Isaac and Rebekah, for 20 years could not have children. And then Rachel had a lot of children. So this family had a history of barrenness in there, and difficulty having children. So maybe the close marriages that they had something to do with that. But if not, certainly it wasn't. We know now that it's not a good idea. But then again, to take our modern medical knowledge and accuse them of not knowing that, of not having been aware of that, and not doing it, that's again not ridiculous to make that accusation. When Seth had lived 105 years, he became the father of Enosh. This word father in Hebrew can mean ancestor. Likewise, when we say that someone is the son of, it can mean descendant. So it's not always the immediate biological link. There could be more than one generation between them. So these genealogies in Genesis, therefore, cannot be used as if they were exhaustive, and because it's possible to say, when Seth had lived 105 years, he became the ancestor of Enosh. He could be the leader, the one who it's led to several others between. It's because that's the way the Hebrew language works. Not only can father and son be used that way, but they can also be used metaphorically. We already saw in chapter 4 that Jabal was the father of all those who live in tents and breed cattle. Jubal was the father of musicians. Tubal-Cain was the father of metal workers. In the New Testament, Barnabas is called son of encouragement. James and John were called sons of thunder. Why is that? Barnabas was a very encouraging guy. James and John were very hot-tempered. So that's why they have this nickname. And Jesus is called son of David, son of Abraham in the genealogy in Matthew. So Jesus is obviously not the immediate descendant of David or Abraham, but he is descended from them by, of course, centuries and millennia in the case of Abraham. Now, so don't just add up years here to make a genealogy and then say, oh, creation took place in 4004 BC, as Bishop Ussher said. That type of reasoning indicates a legalistic mindset and an absence of knowledge of the way that these people think and talk. And after he became the father of Enosh, Seth lived 807 years and had other sons and daughters. Now you're seeing a pattern. Each case, they give a name of this person in the genealogy. They give the number of years before he becomes the father or ancestor of the next named person, and then it gives the number of years he lives after that, and then his passing away. And in each case, it says they had other sons and daughters. So you are having a multiplication of the population, which, of course, God had told them to do, go forth and multiply. And then Enosh, Seth's son or descendant, lives 90 years and becomes the father of Canaan, and so on. Now, you have this pattern that continues until there is the mention of Enoch. Enoch is an exception to the pattern which is being given. Verse 21, when Enoch had lived 21 years, he became the father of Methuselah. And after he became the father of Methuselah, Enoch walked with God. That expression, walked with God, is not used for anyone, not Adam, not Seth, no one, until Enoch. Enoch is the first person who walks with God. Enoch, of course, Adam and Eve walked with God in the cool of the evening in the garden, but that was before they committed sin. So in the post that, Enoch is the first one. And he was no more because God took him away. So you have a situation where he doesn't have a first child, live a certain number of years, and then die. But this is the case. He doesn't die. God takes him away. This is the first time that in the Bible that God does this with anyone. There is an argument that maybe Moses, but no, Moses dies and his body is buried. In the New Testament, there is a statement that when the angel was quarreling with Satan over the body of Moses, he said, "The Lord rebuke you." So yes, Moses died, and there is a body, and only the place of the burial was not known to human beings. And then Methuselah is this next one. Of course, Methuselah is famous because he is the longest living recorded person. Now, how come these people are all so long living? Adam, 930, Seth, 912, Enosh, 905, Canaan, 910, and Mahalalel, 895. And you say, oh, it's going down. But then Jared goes up to 962, and then Methuselah, 969. Now, how come they're living so long? Is this mythological? What's going on here? You will recall that in chapter 1 of Genesis, on the days of creation, one of the things that God does is He takes the water which is covering the earth, and God creates an empty space, an expanse, and He puts some of this water above the expanse and the other below the expanse, and the expanse He calls sky. Now put that fact in with chapter 2, which says that there was no rain on the earth, but a heavy mist would rise. So you've got, think of the climate that you've got here. You've got a water canopy. You've got a lot of water up in the sky, blotting out a lot of ultraviolet rays. You've got an earth that is dim and not nearly bright sunshine that we have now. It's a dim, misty, foggy atmosphere. And so you have a great deal of fertility. You have also have a great deal of this long life because of the absence of the harmful ultraviolet rays coming through because of the water canopy. So this is why we feel this is why they have their people are living so long at this time. You will notice then after the flood that people's lifespan begin to drastically reduce. People who were on the ark, such as Seth, lives to be 600, and which is less than all of these. And then you have a rapid decline of lifespan until you have Abraham living 175, Isaac 180, Jacob 137, Joseph 110, and Joshua also 110. By the time you get down to 110, you're at where we are now. We've got people who live to be 110 today. So it appears that when you look at the flood, one of the things that happened is that it rained a lot, and it says the heavens were opened, and also the fountains of the deep were broken up. So the water above the sky and the water below the sky, all this water begins to empty out on the earth. Because the water reservoirs below the earth are also broken up, that's another reason why you have a drastically changed topography of the earth as well. That's why when it says in the flood that the water reached 100 and so many cubits above the highest mountain, you can't just go to Mount Everest and say Mount Everest is this high, therefore the water was that high. The whole topography of the earth may be crunched up because of this, because indeed the weight of all that water, the sheer weight of all that water could have crunched down a lot of the surface of the earth. So a rapid aging of the earth at that time due to this trauma that is inflicted upon the planet by a worldwide flood. After Enoch, then Methuselah, then Lamech. Now let's look at the other side. If you say that each of the people in this genealogy are immediate fathers of the ones listed, and that these are direct generations, one thing you would have in your favor to say that is because in the New Testament, Enoch is called the seventh from Adam. So does it mean the seventh person from Adam, or does it mean the seventh one listed in genealogy from Adam? But if you want to say that means he's the seventh generation from Adam, then that would be one thing you might want to use in your favor. Also, if you are going to treat this as a strict mathematical list, you will discover that when the flood takes place is also the same years that Methuselah and Lamech die. So that would mean then that when the flood came, Noah, who had found grace in the eyes of the Lord, lives and of course rescues his family, but his father Lamech and his grandfather Methuselah do not find grace in the eyes of the Lord, and they both die in the flood. So among the people that Noah tried to reach with his warnings of the flood were his own father and grandfather who would not listen to him. So if these are immediate descendants, immediate biological generations, and father to son, then that was what you would see happening. And of course, if they are a descendant and not immediate, just the son, then you would not have them both dying in the flood. However, Lamech appears to be the father of Noah, direct generation, because of what we do see here. Lamech had lived 182 years. He had a son. He named him Noah and said, "He will comfort us in the labor and painful toil of our hands caused by the ground the Lord has cursed." Okay, first of all, Lamech is saying that there will be some relief through Noah. Of course, the relief is going to be the destruction of the planet, and perhaps Lamech's own death in that in that destruction. After Noah was born, Lamech lived 595 years, had other sons and daughters. He lived to be 777. Then he died. After Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Now, these are, of course, his kids and his immediate descendants. Peter says in his letter that 8 people were on the ark, and those 8 people are Noah and his wife, and the 3 sons and their wives. That's it. Nobody else on the ark. And, of course, the subsequent human race is descended from them. We are now at the end of chapter 5. Chapter 5 goes quickly into chapter 6 in terms of this subject matter here, so let's continue. When men began to increase in number on the earth, okay, when they are increasing as has been described in chapter 5, the daughters were born to them, okay, so that's children of these, what the genealogy we have just read. The sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Now, who are the sons of God? There are 2 strains of thought on this, and I will tell you what they are, and then I will tell you which one I believe is correct. The first strain of thought is that the sons of God are angels, in this case fallen angels, who have come down to earth and are intermarrying with this. The argument in favor of sons of God is that they is to say that they have sons of God. This expression is used only for angels in the Old Testament. God says to Job, "Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth?" And all the sons of God shouted for joy. The angels being present at the creation of the planet, of the earth. So these expressions, sons of God, being now in the New Testament, Paul says, "Now we are the sons of God," which so in the New Testament, no, it's not used that way, but in the Old Testament, every time it is used this way. So to say, just because you don't like the concept, to say that sons of God must mean something else violates this concept that you don't. Just we have to take the word for what it says and adjust our doctrines to it, not adjust the text to what we want to believe. Now, sons of God, some people, the objections that people say to this being angels is that Jesus says in the New Testament that angels are when people ask him, will there be marriage in heaven? And Jesus says, we will be like the angels. And then he's talking about the angels in heaven. He says they have no marriage, they have no, are not given in marriage. And so when we get to heaven, we will be like that. So he was answering the question that people were trying to trap and twist him to in the subject of when the priests were trying to say, if a woman had 5 husbands in one after another and survived them all of their deaths, and then she died also, if there's life after death. The Sadducees are not believing that there's life after death, but they're asking Jesus, who did believe life after death. So they said, in that case, whose wife would she be in the resurrection, since she had been wife to all of them down on earth? And it was a reply to that question that Jesus said that the angels in heaven did not practice this. Of course, to assume that that means that the angels in heaven are incapable of doing that would, I think, be a reach and an overstretch. Because angels who have come down to earth, there have been angels who ate food. Two angels came down with God to talk to Abraham in Genesis 18, and they ate food that Abraham and Sarah had prepared for them. So they are capable of bodily actions. They're capable of bodily functions. And to say that they cannot do this, I think is overreaching. It is not what the text says. That angels who are in heaven are obedient to God, and they are doing that. And so when they are not married, then that doesn't mean that angels are incapable of doing these things. They have come down to earth and acted in physical ways. Two angels grabbed the hands of Lot and his wife and his two daughters and dragged them away from Sodom and Gomorrah. There's another physical thing that they did. So it's these sons of God, according to this view, these are fallen angels. Now, the other view is by people who feel among the two major reformers, Luther and Calvin. Luther felt that these were fallen angels. Calvin felt that they were not. He felt that they were. But his reasoning, such as it was, said that that it was monstrous to think that. And see, that's the problem. People say, I can't accept that, and therefore it has to be something else. No, if this is what it is, then you have to accept that, because that's what the text says. Now, they said, Calvin and his followers said, that instead, sons of God here were the descendants of Seth. Now, personally, I think that that's a manufactured response by people who are grasping to find something else simply because they don't want to believe what the real answer is. Another thing to consider is that in the mythologies of the world, there are many, many remembrances, stories of gods coming down and having sex with human women. Greek mythology, Zeus is notorious for this kind of thing. He comes down and has these liaisons with different, and he disguises himself in different ways in order to have these relations with these different women. And it's not just Zeus in Greek mythology. This kind of thing is widespread in other mythologies as well. And then the descendants of these unions were often demigods. Heracles would be a good example, famous example of that. But many times the descendants of the gods and humans, they have supernatural powers, but they do not have immortality. And then they're going to die, and then sometimes they are granted, because of love, they are granted, or because of their great deeds, they're granted a space among the immortals. Other times, a goddess who loves a particular human man and sacrifices her immortality in order to be with him. And so there's another love story. But the concept of union between supernatural beings and natural beings has a long, widely varied history. And so we must be aware that these things are remembered. I think what these mythologies are remembering is this, that this happened. It wasn't gods, but it was supernatural beings that did this. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with men forever, for he is mortal. His days will be 120 years. Okay? God sees these things happening, and he says, I'm not going to contend with people forever. They are mortal. His days will be 120 years. Now, what does his days will be 120 years mean? Two ideas. Number one, that this is going to be a lifespan, 120 years. The problem with that interpretation is, first of all, there are people like Abraham. There's people like Abraham and others who have lived longer than that. And then the other problem is that Moses says that there will be that our years will be 70 or 80 if we have the strength, and then we will fly away. So therefore, God, I think, here is saying this 120 years is not going to be lifespan, but that God is going to work with humanity for 120 years. From this time, the clock starts ticking, 120 years to the flood.